One thing I notice in recent times, in recent years, is how so much of our language in the media and in general in public around race is such that it separates people into their ethnicities. And people refer to themselves by their ethnicity quite a lot. And people talk about social issues in terms of ethnicities. I mean, we see headlines which target white people or which point out the grievances of black people or the grievances of Muslims or whatever it is. And we see this so often, and we have seen this so often, that it's become quite normal and quite commonplace to talk in these terms now. And oftentimes, what I find is that the grievances are usually from non white ethnicities, in other words, minorities in the country. And grievances of the white majority are usually unheard. I was speaking to a friend about this once, and she told me that it's because the white majority are the ones with the power. And so, in a sense, their problems aren't the same as the problems of minorities. And the reason we were even talking about this was because I'd seen an ad for a new book which said, "Why I don't talk about race to white people anymore," or something along those lines. And I saw this ad out on a billboard in the street, and I thought it was quite offensive. I thought if I'm a white person walking past this, I'm going to be quite offended by that. But it was a provocative title for this book written by a black author, a British black author. And yeah, I guess it gets to sell copies because of that. But she was allowed to say something like that and to put it up as a public ad because it's considered acceptable to say things like that. Because again, like my friend was suggesting, white people are the majority and therefore they have the power. But from my reckoning, I think that this kind of language, though you could argue has some truth to its reasoning, which is that white people are the majority and it's minorities who've suffered, I think this kind of language doesn't really get us to where we want to go as a country and as a community. Because I think where we really want to go is to a place where your ethnicity doesn't matter. You're British, and that means you share in British values. You belong to the tribe that is Britain. This is also why I reject the people who have more right-wing views on this, where they say, well, we need to re-migrate people, we need to kick all the immigrants out. Or if, for example, somebody who's Muslim or somebody who's black commits a crime or commits some kind of felony, they immediately blame everyone off that background. Whereas when a white person does it, they don't do that, right? So and so that kind of thinking leads to the position where you think the only way to deal with it is to treat everyone as a homogenous group, and that means if you don't think a certain minority are good for your country, you just want to kick them all out. But doing something like that just undoes all the progress we have made as a country, as a nation, in actually living side by side with our differences and yet sharing in British culture. But I think what's happened is that our sense of culture and our sense of identity in terms of what binds us together just hasn't been strong enough. This is an area where I quite envy Americans because they are all proud of their constitution, they're proud of the history of their country by and large. And they quote these things a lot, actually. You know, patriotic Americans quote these things. But patriotic British people, they'll quote things like the Empire. They'll quote grand things that Britain achieved in the past. But ethnic minorities in this country, a lot of them, they don't really look at the Empire as a good thing. And so it made me think that we need something else that we can all point to and share in. And obviously, I can think of things like British food. I could think of things like the TV shows, the little sense of humor we have, the things that we all enjoy, those little things in life. And I think that's what we all share in as Brits. But I think we need more than that. I think we almost need a charter of values, or better yet, just to be educated on the history of Britain, but also a conversation about what it means to live as a unified nation, having come from all these different backgrounds and yet here together as British people. And I think it's important we do this because it's not just for the sake of harmony, it's not just for the sake of this being the most future proof way of having a country, but it's also the opportunity that sits in front of us of creating a culture, creating a society that thinks of itself more like a tribe and less like a nation. You know, if you think about a tribe, Does a tribe need to have a national boundary? Not really. Anywhere I go in the world, if I meet someone British, I should be able to feel a bond with that person, which I do right now, right? And it's because we have some shared values. But if we allow this sort of language to proliferate, this sort of this race versus that race, and I'm a minority, you're a majority, and you're a white person, I'm this and that, then we're going to lose that. And I think we're already losing that a little bit. Not to say that we had it perfect in the first place, but I don't think it's the right direction. So there's an opportunity in front of us to create a society and a culture that's much more cohesive, where, as MLK Jr. said, the color of your skin is just not important anymore. But we have to create that. And I think it begins by actually discussing what our shared values are. And it means people buying into those shared values. This is also why I'm not a fan of this idea of multiculturalism, whereby you live in Britain, but you don't need to partake in British values. You just need to follow the law, but then you can follow your own culture and do what you want. I don't agree with that at all. I just don't think that builds a cohesive society in the end. I think people have to have shared values and actually want to hang out with each other, be with each other, talk to each other, date each other, marry each other. That's how you're going to have a cohesive, harmonious society. So that's what we should be working towards. And until we get that happening, if instead we've just got segregation, even if it's self-imposed segregation, then we're not getting there. We're not making it happen yet. So I hope we can see more of this happen in future, and I think it's imperative that we do this.